What would make a bankrupt widower spend his last dollar on a girl being sold by her own parents? What secret was hidden in her shoe? And why were powerful men willing to destroy anyone who stood in their way? This isn't just a story about survival. It's about a quiet rebellion that would shake an entire town to its core. If you're new to the channel, make sure to subscribe, like the video, and tell us where you're watching from in the comments below. Now, let's jump into the story. The dust swirled slowly in the air, catching the orange glow of the setting sun over the small town of Millbend. It was the kind of afternoon where time seemed to pause, when every footstep, every voice, echoed louder than usual. In the center of the square, a crowd had gathered, murmuring quietly. Some faces were filled with discomfort, others with quiet excitement. But all eyes were focused on the wooden platform at the heart of it all. On that platform stood a young woman, her shoulders stiff, her eyes locked on the ground. Her name was Marlin Devons, though no one said it aloud. Her blue dress was torn near the hem, her arms bruised and her hair uncombed. Beside her, two older figures stood silently, her parents. Their faces were empty, hollow from years of struggle, perhaps regret. No one could tell if they felt shame or if they had simply gone numb. Warden Pike, the town's auctioneer and part-time deputy, stepped forward. He raised a paper in one hand and cleared his throat. "Last lot of the day," he said, his voice cutting through the murmurs. "Healthy, obedient 19-year-old girl, starting at $20. The silence thickened. People glanced at each other. It was not the first time someone had been offered at one of Millbend's debt auctions, but never someone so young, and never in such a public way. From the far end of the square, Jonas Calloway stood still, arms crossed over his chest. A tall, quiet man with dark skin and a weathered coat. Jonas was known in town but rarely spoken to. He had once owned a thriving piece of farmland until the drought turned his fields to dust. Then came the loss of his wife, and later, his son. Now all he had left was a tired horse, an old wagon, and a worn plot of land just outside town. 25, a voice called out. It was Ned Burlow, the saloon owner. His grin was sharp, his eyes never leaving Marlene. He chuckled and leaned against a post, enjoying the attention. 30, another voice said, louder. Brig Halter, a rancher known for his heavy hands and loud temper, raised his hat as he shouted the number. Marlene flinched at the sound. Jonas's fists tightened. He had no business being there. The few coins he carried were meant for seed, for the next harvest that might never come. But something about the way Marlin stood on that platform, not begging, not crying, just waiting, broke something open in him. 50, Jonas said quietly. His voice wasn't loud, but it carried. People turned. Conversation stopped. Eyes widened. Ned laughed. "What's he thinking? With what money?" 60, shouted Brig, not to be outbid. Jonas took a slow step forward. He reached into his coat and pulled out a cloth pouch. The jingle of coins was clear. He looked straight at Warden Pike. 70, he said. Warden Pike blinked. His jaw worked without words for a moment. "Mr. Calloway," he finally said, hesitant. "I'm not sure this is proper." "The law says a free man can place a bid at a public auction," Jonas replied, his tone steady. "Unless you want to explain to the judge why you refused the highest offer." Pike looked to the crowd. No one answered. Even Brig lowered his hand. 70. Once. Twice. "Sold," the auctioneer said, striking the platform with a wooden stick. A wave of noise swept through the crowd, some gasping, others whispering. Jonas walked forward, slowly, as if each step through the dust carried weight. Marlene didn't move. Her eyes remained fixed to the boards beneath her. He reached out but didn't touch her. "You're coming with me," he said gently. She stepped down from the platform without a word. Up close, Jonas saw more bruises. Old ones. The kind that don't come from accidents. "What's your name?" he asked as they walked past the stunned crowd. "Marlene," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "Marlin Devons. I'm Jonas." "I know who you are," she said. Everyone does. Behind them, voices grew louder. He paid $70 for her? To a black man? This ain't right. As they reached the edge of the square, Ned shouted behind them. Won't be long before someone takes her back, Calloway. You can't hold on to what don't belong. Jonas didn't answer. He helped Marlene onto his wagon. She flinched at the touch, though he was careful. I won't hurt you, he said, his voice low. You have my word. For the first time, she looked at him, not with fear but with a question. Something passed between them. Something unspoken but understood. Why? She asked. Jonas looked toward the horizon. Because I know what it's like to be treated like you're worth less than nothing. They rode out of town slowly, two silent figures in a rattling wagon. No one saw the way Marlin reached into her shoe and gently adjusted the tiny metal key she had hidden there. No one noticed the man in the shadows who gave her the smallest nod as she left. There was more to this girl than anyone knew, and the story of Millbend was about to change forever. The wagon creaked as it climbed the rough trail beyond the town, the sun slowly sinking behind the ridge. Marlin sat quietly, her hands folded in her lap, her eyes watching the winding road ahead. Behind her, the town of Millbend faded into the distance, replaced by dry hills, tall weeds, and stretches of forgotten land. Jonas guided the horse carefully, his face calm but alert. The road was familiar to him. He had walked it many times in better days and worse. Marlene had not spoken again since they left the square. He hadn't expected her to. Silence, after all, was often safer than questions. They reached the top of the hill just as dusk fell. Below them, surrounded by parched fields and a small patch of oak trees, stood a small wooden house with a tin roof. Nearby, a well leaned slightly to one side, and behind it, a barn with half a roof. The land was dry, but there was a quiet peace to it. No voices, no footsteps, no eyes watching. This is it, Jonas said softly. It's not much, but it's mine. No one will bother you here. Marlene didn't move at first. She stared at the house, her eyes flicking to the windows, the trees, the corners of the barn. She was studying the space, measuring it, as someone who had learned never to trust her surroundings. Jonas climbed down first, tying the reins to a wooden post. Then he turned to her. You can sleep in the back room, he said. It used to be my son's. It has a lock on the inside. That made her pause. Your son? She asked. He passed. Same winter my wife did. Pneumonia took them both. His voice was steady but hollow. Inside the house, the air was cool and smelled of wood smoke. The furniture was simple, but well cared for. Everything had its place. Books were lined up neatly on a shelf made from old planks. A lantern glowed on the central table, already lit. Marlene froze. Someone's been here, she said quickly, stepping back. Jonas held up a hand. Wait here. He moved through the house with quiet steps, opening doors, checking corners. When he returned, his shoulders relaxed. It was Eula, he said. She left food. Eula Thorpe? Marlin asked, surprised. Jonas looked at her. You know her? She delivered my little sister. Years ago. She's the only person who still checks on me, he said with a faint smile. Stubborn woman. As Marlin stepped further inside, she noticed the walls were clean, the floors swept. It was not the home of a broken man. It was the home of someone who refused to fall apart. They sat at the table later, eating in silence. The stew was simple, but warm. Marlin barely touched hers. You plan to run tonight, Jonas said, not accusing, just stating. Marlin's spoon paused in the bowl. You'd stop me? She asked. No, he replied. But I would warn you. She waited. There are men in the woods east of here, he continued. Bounty hunters. The mayor hired them after 3 workers from the Sullivan Ranch disappeared last week. I'm not a runaway, she said, her voice tense. I know, but they won't care. Marlin looked down at her hands. Her fingers were trembling. Not from fear of Jonas, but from memories too heavy to carry. The next morning, Marlin woke to an empty house. The door was unlocked. The sun was already up, spilling golden light across the wooden floor. She stepped outside slowly and saw Jonas near the garden. He was trying to water the cracked soil with a bucket from the well. The plants were barely holding on, their leaves curled and brown. He moved with patience as if he believed something might still grow. Back inside, Marlin wandered through the house, not to steal but to understand. In a drawer by the bed, she found letters, thick paper, some with stamps. Most were from a man named Professor Orrin Wicks in the city. The letters spoke of laws, rights, and land deeds. One page showed a map. Another had parts underlined with careful notes. Beside the letters was a thin book. The cover was worn, the pages filled with rules about property and freedom. It looked like Jonas had read it 100 times. Before she could read more, the sound of horses cut through the morning stillness. She ran to the window. 3 men rode onto the property. Ned Burlow was easy to recognize. Beside him was Brig Halter, and with them a man Marlene had never seen before. He was well-dressed, his hat clean, his coat sharp. He smiled too much. Jonas met them near the gate. "Mr. Calloway," said Ned, pretending to be friendly. "We brought someone to meet you. This here is Judge Keene, newly assigned to our county." The judge tipped his hat. "We're updating land records," he said, his tone smooth. "Some plots may need to be reassessed for efficiency." Jonas didn't blink. "My taxes are paid. This land is mine." "For now," Brig muttered. "Some soil can't grow. Anything," the judge added with a smile. "Maybe it's time to put it to better use." When they left, Marlene came to the porch. "They want your land," she said. "They always have," Jonas replied. "Why? It's dry. There's nothing here." He paused. "There's something more valuable than dirt here." That afternoon, Eula arrived with her wagon. She brought seeds, bread, and a sealed envelope. "This came on the telegraph," she said. "Jonas, read it." His jaw tightened. He turned to Marlene. "Tell me exactly what you heard during your father's meetings with Mayor Timble." Her eyes widened. "How do you know about that?" Eula placed a hand on Marlene's arm. "You're not the first girl we've tried to help escape that house." Marlene slowly reached down and touched her shoe. Inside it, the small metal key pressed against her heel like a secret waiting to be used. Night had fallen over Millbend, and the streets lay quiet under the cover of clouds. A light drizzle coated the rooftops, softening the sound of footsteps and wheels. To most, it was just another rainy evening. But for Marlene and Jonas, it was the night everything would begin to change. Inside the cabin, a single lamp flickered. Marlin sat by the table holding a thin red book in her hands. The key from her shoe had opened her father's desk just as she remembered. The book had been hidden beneath papers full of names, dates, payments, and secret deals. Many pages were marked with the mayor's initials. Others had land plots sketched with careful detail. Jonas leaned over her shoulder, reading without speaking. Beside them, Eula sorted through the pages, already copied. "This is more than we expected," she whispered. "They were planning to sell land they didn't even own yet." Marlene nodded slowly. "They planned to control the railway route, push out anyone who stood in the way." Jonas folded his arms. "And that includes us." Across town, in the dim telegraph office, Harvey Dell locked the door behind them. The old clerk barely spoke as he adjusted his glasses and opened the back panel of the machine. "Line to the city is clear," he said softly. "But you'll have to be quick." Jonas nodded and placed the book's copied pages on the counter. "Send them to this name," he said, sliding over a note. Harvey glanced at it. "He's with the Eastern paper, isn't he?" "And the railway," Jonas said. "He's the one who sent that letter." As the machine clicked and tapped, Jonas stared out the window. He couldn't see Marlin, but he trusted she would be where she needed to be. At that same moment, Marlin moved through the shadows near the town hall. Her dark cloak clung to her shoulders as she stepped around puddles. No one noticed her figure slip behind the building or the way she picked the lock with quiet fingers. Inside, the mayor's office was still, lit only by the faint glow from the fireplace. She worked quickly. She knew the layout, remembered where he kept the town records and secret keys. From a hidden drawer, she pulled out maps and property transfers. Some of them were fake, forged to make it look like farmers had sold land willingly. She placed them into her satchel, along with another item she hadn't expected to find. A letter from Judge Keene asking for permission to clear out landholders, by any means needed. Back at Jonas's farm, Marlene returned before dawn. She placed the new documents beside the others on the table. Jonas looked at her with a quiet pride, then handed her a cup of tea. "We send these out today," he said. "Not just to the railway office, to the city paper, to the federal courts," Eula added, "and to Reverend Sim. He'll know how to speak to the people when the time comes." As the sun rose, so did the tension in town. People noticed the posters. First, copies of the Red Book's pages had been placed outside the church near the market and even on the doors of the tavern. At first they didn't believe what they read. Names they recognized. Transactions they had never seen. Land that was supposed to belong to local families, suddenly marked for sale to outsiders. Whispers began to spread. The mayor had cheated them. The judge was part of it. Even Brig and Ned, who were always loud and proud, had gone quiet. At 10 o'clock sharp, a train whistle blew louder than usual. It wasn't a cargo train or a mail car. It was a special rail car, sent by the Eastern Company. When it stopped, 3 men stepped off, a representative from the railway, a federal officer, and a reporter holding a leather notebook. Jonas met them at the platform and walked them to the town square. There, a crowd had already formed. Mayor Timble appeared, red-faced and sweating. He tried to speak, but the railway representative raised his hand. "We received your letter, Jonas Calloway," he said. "And your evidence." The crowd fell, silent. The federal officer held up the red book. "This contains enough proof to open a full investigation," he said, "including forged documents, land theft, and illegal auctions." The mayor shouted, "This is lies. Someone planted that." "Your name is on every page," the reporter replied calmly. Behind them, Judge Keene tried to slip away but was stopped by Sheriff Lambert, who had read the posters that morning and decided to do the right thing, for once. Then Marlin stepped forward, no longer hidden in a cloak. She walked straight to the front and stood beside Jonas. "This town sold me," she said in a clear voice. "But that's not the worst of it. They sold their neighbors, their land, their rights, and they thought no one would speak." People stared at her, some in shame, some in awe. "We're not here for revenge," Jonas added. "We're here to stop the damage from going any further." The federal officer nodded. "We'll need to speak with both of you in detail, and we'll need this book for evidence." As the crowd slowly began to scatter, some people came forward to thank Marlin. Others still looked afraid, unsure of what would come next. But one thing was clear. The silence had been broken, and whispers beneath the ground were beginning to rise. 6 months passed since the day Marlene and Jonas stood in the square and told the truth. Millbend was no longer the same place it had been. The old signs were still there, the dusty streets, the wooden buildings, the oak trees swaying at the edge of town. But something deeper had shifted. The railway line, once a rumor, used for power and lies, now ran right through the edge of Jonas's land. The train came twice a day, bringing supplies, visitors, and new life to the town. Jonas hadn't asked for it, but the railway company had insisted. After the federal investigation proved that Mayor Timble's original route crossed unstable land, Jonas's farm had become the most reliable path. A small station had been built at the edge of his property. It was modest, just 2 platforms and a ticket booth, but it was enough. People gathered there every day. Workers, travelers, farmers. It was a place of movement, of change. Not far from the station stood a new building. It had taken months to raise the walls and gather materials, but now it stood tall, proud, and full of laughter. It was a school, one of the first in the region to welcome every child, no matter their color or background. Inside, Marlene moved between rows of benches, helping students with their letters and numbers. Her voice was calm, her smile patient. The children listened closely, even when they didn't understand right away. Some had never held a book before. Others came from far away, walking miles just to sit in her classroom. Jonas watched from the doorway, holding a wooden frame he planned to hang over the entrance. It read, "Knowledge belongs to everyone." "I never imagined I'd be teaching," Marlin said one afternoon, sitting beneath a large tree outside the school. The sun filtered through the leaves, and her dress rustled in the breeze. "I was always the girl who couldn't lift her head, who thought silence was safety." Jonas smiled. "You always had something inside you," he said. "You just needed a place to grow." The people of Millbend were still adjusting. Some of the older folks kept their distance. They had spent years believing certain lies and didn't know how to accept the truth. But others had begun to change. They sent their children to the school. They offered a nod when they passed Jonas on the road. Small things, but real. Mayor Timble was gone, removed from office and sent to prison after the full scope of his actions became public. Judge Keene had disappeared in the night, but federal agents caught him weeks later in a nearby city using a false name. Brig Halter and Ned Burlow lost their power. Their businesses crumbled and they faded into the background. In their place, a new mayor had been elected. Ella Briggs, a widow who had worked quietly behind the counter of the town's only library for years, now led with care and fairness. Her first law had been simple. No child in Millbend would be turned away from school again. One evening, Eula arrived at the farm with a letter in hand. It was sealed with a mark Marlin didn't recognize, but Jonas did. "It's from Professor Wicks," he said, breaking the seal carefully. Inside was a short note and a promise. 15 scholarships had been approved. The school would grow. More books, more teachers, more children with chances they'd never dreamed of. 15 lives changed, Marlene said, her fingers brushing the small scar on her wrist. They held a dinner that night with the people who had stood by them: Eula, Harvey the telegraph clerk, Sheriff Lambert, and Reverend Sim. No one made speeches. They simply ate, laughed, and remembered how far they had come. When the first official train pulled into the station days later, crowd gathered, flags waved. Children sang a song they had learned in class. The new mayor welcomed the guests with warm words, but the people looked toward Jonas and Marlene. An older woman, one who had once turned her eyes away at the auction square, stepped forward and whispered to Marlene, "My son got a job here. They never would have given him a chance before." Marlene smiled. Across the platform, a young man with a limp waved proudly in his station uniform. "We didn't do this alone," she replied. "It took all of us." That evening, as the sun dipped low and cast a golden glow over the hills, Jonas and Marlene walked back to their home. The sky blazed with color, and the lights of the town twinkled behind them. "When I stood on that platform," Marlene said softly, "I wanted revenge. I wanted them to feel what I felt." Jonas nodded, waiting. "But now," she continued, "I understand freedom isn't just breaking chains. It's building a table where everyone has a seat." Jonas looked out at the school, the station, the growing crops behind the house. "They tried to tell us we were nothing, that we didn't belong, but we proved something else. That our value can't be measured in money," Marlene said. "And can't be sold," Jonas finished. They stood together, not as a man who bought and a woman who was sold, but as partners who changed the course of a town. The real story of Millbend didn't end with the railway or the school. It continued every time a child opened a book, every time someone chose truth over silence, every time someone decided to plant a seed, not knowing if it would grow but believing it could. And that was enough.